We start with outrage here in the United States over immigration, the outcry over the separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border, and the finger pointing right here in Washington. Only moments ago, we heard this from President Trump.
I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're they're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing. The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. Won't be. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places, we can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch. We have the worst immigration laws in the entire world. Nobody has such sad, such bad, and actually in many cases, such horrible and tough. You see about child separation. You see what's going on there. But just remember, a country without borders is not a country at all.
Clearly, the president putting the blame on the Democrats, not taking any responsibility for the practice being carried out right now by the U.S. Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security. A day ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, tweeted this, quote, "We do not have a policy of separating families at the border, period," close quote. But today, she defended that practice.
To a select few in the media, Congress, and the advocacy community, I'd like to start with a message for you. This department will no longer stand by and watch you attack law enforcement for enforcing the laws passed by Congress. We will not apologize. For those who have complained about this administration's vigorous enforcement of the law and the results of that enforcement, this is your opportunity to work with us to fix the incentives that encourage and even reward people who violate our laws and, even worse, put themselves and their families at risk of harm.
The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is the one who actually announced this new no-tolerance policy last month, and that has led to family separations, little kids being taken away from their mothers and fathers. Today, Sessions defended his and the president's reasoning.
When we ignore our laws at the border, we obviously encourage hundreds of thousands of people a year to likewise ignore our laws and illegally enter our country, creating an enormous burden on our law enforcement, on our schools, our hospitals, and our social programs. President Trump has said this lawlessness cannot continue. We do not want to separate parents from their children. You can be sure of that.
And then there's President Trump's senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, who told the New York Times, and I'm quoting now, "It was a simple decision by the administration to have a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry, period. The message is that no one is exempt from immigration law," close quote. Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, who's joining us right now. So, Jeff, what more are you hearing from officials today on this decision to go ahead and separate children from their parents?
Well, if there's no question, even though Stephen Miller, there, a senior advisor to the president, called it a simple decision, it is being viewed as anything but a simple decision, largely because of the images that are coming in from the border, those images of the children, the images of the parents and families. The reality here is, Wolf, the White House realizes it has not done a good job explaining this policy. The White House realizes it has not done a good job of communicating this policy. And they really are hearing a variety of criticism across the board from Republicans on Capitol Hill, from evangelical groups, and Democrats as well, of course, but also such voices as former First Lady Laura Bush. So the White House is trying to not necessarily back down or apologize. That's something we do not see this administration doing very often, if at all. But they are trying to explain it and call it more of a law enforcement issue. But the reality here, Wolf, is that this is at the heart of the broader immigration issue, and there's no end in sight to that necessarily. This was being viewed as a bit of a bargaining chip, if you will. The president, other administration officials here, hoped that it would bring Democrats to the table here to get more wall funding, to do stronger immigration proposals, but that isn't necessarily happening. Now there is a full-blown a crisis on their hands here at the White House, but also most particularly those images, Wolf. So the White House was scheduled to have a briefing in this hour. It's actually been pushed back a couple hours, a sign they are still trying to find some of the answers here, Wolf, to these questions. Of course, the president is on Capitol Hill tomorrow trying to convince some Republicans on the House side a way forward on immigration. But this is not ending anytime soon. And again, it's those images that the president watching doesn't like them, but not backing away from any of this, still blaming Democrats.
And he could clearly end it. I understand comprehensive immigration reform, that's a major ordeal legislatively. You got to get the president to sign legislation. But to simply stop removing kids from their parents, he could pick up the phone and say, don't do it anymore, right?
He could indeed. He could make that directive right now. That could stop immediately. That's what previous administrations have done. But you can see just the push and the pull, and in fact, the disagreements inside this administration, inside this West Wing, just by the variety of on-the-record comments we saw, most particularly from Stephen Miller, the top senior policy advisor on immigration. They, said it was a simple matter. The Attorney General also made this policy decision weeks and months ago. The president could overturn that. The White House is saying it's a law. That's not true. It's an administration policy he could overturn. But at this point, he's showing no signs he'll do it immediately. It certainly has now become rolled into, if you will, the broader immigration debate. Wolf?
Certainly has. All right, Jeff Zeleny will stand by later this afternoon for that White House briefing. Cruel, inhumane, atrocious, and heartbreaking. Those are just some of the words being used to describe this immigration practice now of separating children from their parents. Adding to the outrage, pictures from inside a detention center showing some of those children housed in chain-like cages. Our correspondent Polo Sandoval is joining us from outside a facility in Brownsville, Texas for us. Polo, so what can you tell us about what's going on inside in that huge structure behind you?
Wolf, it's an old Walmart that's been repurposed. Answering that question, it really is quite difficult, too, Wolf. We have to rely heavily on the accounts from a handful of lawmakers who have had the opportunity to tour that facility, and also a small handful of reporters who have had the opportunity to document what's happening inside. We've seen very similar scenes play out in detention centers throughout the country. 24 hours ago, I was standing outside one in New Jersey, and today here we are in Texas, and you see some of the pictures that have been released by the Department of Homeland Security in the last 24 hours that are leading to that outrage, and also, of course, many questions about the Trump's current implementation of its policies here and its practices. We have heard just recently here the head of the Department of Homeland Security trying to clarify or offer some kind of clarity, saying that this idea that all families are being criminally prosecuted and all of their children being separated is, quote, misinformation. But at the same time, there is a lack of explanation from the administration as to who exactly is subject to this kind of practice here. We have seen some families get taken into custody here in South Texas and then later released with a court date. And then we have also seen several of the others who have been subjected to these promises from the administration that they will criminally be prosecuted and then, of course, separated from their parents, at least the children separated from their parents, while those moms and dads go through the judicial process. So that's what we're seeing right now on the ground here. Wolf, certainly outrage leading to questions, while the Trump administration trying to offer some form of clarity to what's happening throughout the country right now. Wolf?
All right, Polo, thank you. Polo Sandoval in Brownsville, Texas. President Trump falsely blames Democrats for the children being separated from their parents. John Sandweg was acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement under President Obama. He's joining us now live from New York. John, thank you very much for joining us. So what's your response to the president blaming the Democrats?
I'm just confused, Wolf. I don't know where that's coming from.
Well, he says the Democrats could change it by going along with what he wants, comprehensive immigration reform, and then you could end this policy. But that's a complicated, long ordeal. Who knows how long that's going to take, if it's ever going to take. They've been trying for comprehensive immigration reform for years and years, as you well know. But he says right now the Democrats are to blame for this current situation in which these kids are being taken away from their moms and dads.
Well, if there is no law on the books at all that requires the administration to separate parents from children, this is 100% a policy solution. No legislation is required to end this practice. As you indicated earlier, the president could just pick up the phone and end this. Unfortunately, and I think as you're right as well, Congress has proven incapable, I mean, as badly as we need immigration reform, of passing a comprehensive immigration reform. So I'm concerned if the president says that the continuation of this policy hinges upon action by Congress.
When you served as the head of ICE during the Obama administration, what was the policy when, let's say, a mother came into the United States with a young kid or a few kids and sought asylum? Were they separated?
No. Well, family unity was the overwhelming policy in the Obama administration. Listen, the federal government is not equipped to be the caretaker. You saw those images. Border Patrol is not equipped to be the caretaker for thousands of children. In my experience, they don't want to be the caretaker. They want to do their job, which is patrolling the border, catching bad guys who are trying to enter the United States. We would enforce the law against those individuals. We had a zero-tolerance policy at the border in the sense that we would enforce the law against everybody who entered unlawfully unless they had a valid claim. But we did it in a way that kept families together. I think one other point, Wolf, very quickly that scares me, though, is when you separate families, not only do you end up with images like the ones we saw of kids in cages, but years from now, you run a great likelihood that these kids will never be reunited with their parents. The parents' cases move very quickly, and they end up back in Central America deported, while the kids' cases move very slowly here in the United States. We already heard about HHS losing track of 1,500 kids. Now we've increased the problem dramatically, and by my own experience, I will tell you it's very difficult for the government to reunite those families once the children are separated.
You know, I had a chance to interview in March of last year, in 2017, more than a year ago, John Kelly. He was then the Secretary of Homeland Security. He's now the White House Chief of Staff. And he told me then, and I'm going to play the clip for you, he told me then that this was what the administration wanted to do, a new policy of separating kids from their parents. Listen to this exchange I had with him, March 2017. Are you, the Department of Homeland Security, considering a new initiative that would separate children from their parents if they try to enter the United States illegally?
Let me start by saying I would do almost anything to deter the people from Central America to getting on this very, very dangerous network that brings them up through Mexico into the United States.
Let me just be precise.
Right.
If you get some young kids who are coming in, managed to sneak into the United States with their parents, are Department of Homeland Security personnel going to separate the children from their moms and dads?
We have tremendous experience in dealing with unaccompanied minors. We turn them over to HHS, and they do a very, very good job of either putting them in kind of foster care or linking them up with parents or family members in the United States. Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that. They will be well cared for as we deal with their parents.
But you understand how that looks to the average person who is,
It's more important to me, Wolf, to try to keep people off of this awful network.
So you can see there, John, he was thinking about it, separating kids from their moms and dads in March of last year, and now the last few weeks, this policy has actually been implemented. I want to get your reaction to that.
Well, you heard the then Secretary talk about deterrence. I think what concerns me is that far too often I think we overestimate our ability to deter people who are fleeing horrific violence and poverty from trying to find a better life for their families. In my experience, Wolf, working on border issues at DHS and at ICE, I will tell you that I found there's very little we can do that is worse than what the people are going through. You got to remember, they pay everything they have to smugglers. They take a very dangerous route up through Mexico to the United States border. But the desire and the desperation is so great that I found there's very little that we can do on this side that will actually stop them from making that journey.